Saturday, February 24th, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I like to talk about a real classic of monetary history, a book that I've read many times and that a lot of you could read very quickly. It's only 68 pages. I think it's in PDF form. You can buy it from eBay, Amazon, anywhere. And it's called Fiat Money Inflation in France, How It Came, What It Brought, and How It Ended by Andrew Dickson White. It was written in 1912, I think. And I'll read the blurb about the book behind it here. And one of the reasons I'm looking into this book today is an article I saw in Zero Hedge yesterday about the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve Bank of Boston had a conference, monetary conference yesterday in New York. And I'll come in onto that a little later though. Let's go into this book because I read this book years ago, even before the 07, 08, 09 crisis, whatever you want to call it. And I could see, the same thing happening to our monetary system. But in this case, it was just in one country. So I'll read a little bit about what the book is about. It says here, in 1790, the French people, by general acquiescence, embarked upon what they believed to be a harmless experience in currency inflation. The results of this action are vividly described in Dr. Andrew Dickson White's book entitled Fiat Money Inflation in France, How It Came, What It Brought, and How It Ended. The story of fiat money inflation in France is one of great interest to legislators, to economic students, and to all business and thinking men. It records the most gigantic attempt ever made in the history of the world, by a government to create an inconvertible paper currency and to maintain its circulation at various levels of value. Well, I would say, this was written before the 08 crisis and the experiment with zero interest rate, negative interest rate, QE. So I would say this is now, the second most gigantic attempt ever made in history. And that's why I think it's really important for people to read this book. And the other thing that, it all ends in tears, basically. And I'll just read a little bit here in the beginning. In tears for France as a country. It says here in the beginning, early in the year 1789, the French nation found itself in deep financial embarrassment. Well, you can translate that to early in 2009, the Western Europe, the United States, found themselves in deep financial embarrassment, can't you? After the 08 crisis. There was a heavy debt and a serious deficit. Well, same thing. The vast reforms of that period, though a lasting blessing politically, were a temporary evil financially. So he's talking about the French Revolution, which happened in 1789. There was a general want of confidence in business circles. Capital had shown its proverbial timidity by retiring out of sight as far as possible. Throughout the land was stagnation. So what the French did, to cut a fairly short story shorter, is that they they confiscated after the revolution, they confiscated all the nobilities and the church's land, and they used that to back the assignats, they were called, and also mandats later on they were called. They were just paper money, but they were actually backed by land, but it still didn't work. And they kept printing. A lot of times things improved, but then they got worse again. And this lasted until 1797. So it took about, from 1790 when they started the program, took about 7 years for everything to collapse, for this scheme to really come to an end. And you could say, well, nowadays you could say we've been on a fiat money experience since 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window, and we've had a petrodollar experience. Instead of being backed by land, it's backed by the oil now, and arms, I guess. And there's a few parts of the book here that are really interesting that you can see, you know, what happened then is happening now. And the other point I would make is that a lot of the economists, they come out, you know, mainstream economists, bank economists, central bankers, PhD, Keynesians, you know, after we've had about, you know, 10 years of QE, money printing, and this big, even bigger experiment than the French did in 1790 to 1797, because we've got the whole world to do the same thing. So I think it might last longer. They might be able to keep it, you know, they've been keeping it going really, if you think about it, since 1971. So that's almost 50 years. The French kept it going for almost 10 years. But I'll read here from page 56. And it says, to sustain this new currency, the government resorted to every method that ingenuity could devise. Pamphlets suited to people of every capacity were published explaining its advantage. Never was there more skillful puffing. And that reminds me of all this talk about QE. You know, the pamphlets are like the central bank literature. You know, the fact that they don't call money printing, they call it quantitative easing. And now this latest article, which I'll put the link to below in the description, from the Boston Fed, they've got a new term for money printing or QE. It's called LSAP. It sounds really innocuous and really academic. Well, it's just large scale asset purchases. So huge money printing, that's all it means. So this reminds me of that. Other part of the book that's really interesting, and I'll read from it as well. It says here on page 48, to the surprise of the great majority of the French people, the value of the assignats, aka fiat money, was found after the monetary spasm of fear had passed, not to have been permanently increased by these measures. On the contrary, their fiat paper persisted in obeying the natural laws of finance, and as new issues increased, money printing, their value decreased, nor did the most lavish aid of nature avail. The paper money of the nation seemed to possess a magic power to transmutate prosperity into adversity and plenty of famine. Read inequality. But at the same time, it talks here about how things actually sometimes seemed to be improving. The issues of paper money continued. Toward the end of 1794, 7,000 millions in assignats were in circulation. By the end of May 1795, the circulation was increased to 10,000 millions. At the end of July, to 14,000 millions, and the value of 100 francs in paper fell steadily, first to 4 francs in gold, then to 3, then to 2, then to 1/2. And this is the interesting part. But curiously enough, while this depreciation was rapidly going on, as at various other periods when depreciation was rapid, there came an apparent revival of business. The hopes of many were revived by the fact that in spite of the decline of paper, there was an exceedingly brisk trade in all kinds of permanent property. Whatever articles of permanent value certain needy people were willing to sell, certain cunning people were willing to buy and pay good prices for in assignats. At this, hope revived for a time in certain quarters, but ere long it was discovered that this was one of the most distressing results of a natural law, which is sure to come into play under such circumstances. It was simply a feverish activity caused by the intense desire for a large number of the shrewder class, the 1%, to convert their paper money into anything and everything which they could hold and hoard until the collapse which they foresaw should take place. This very activity in business simply indicated the disease. It was simply legal robbery of the more enthusiastic and trusting by the more cold-hearted and keen. It was the unloading of the assignats upon the mass of the people. So that's what we're getting right now, the unloading of the assignats and the fiat money. That's why we've got bubbles everywhere, because the people who know what's going on, they're getting out of the fiat money. How long this will last? The end will be hyperinflation, which is the collapse of the currency. People don't want it anymore. It's got nothing to do with economic activity. Hyperinflation is loss of confidence in the paper. You could argue this has been going on for how long now? 47 years. Come August 15th. The French experiment went on for almost 8 years. But now this experiment is being done by the biggest, most powerful, richest countries in the world. And it's crazy. And it's going to end just like in France. There's going to be revulsion to the assignats, or paper money. And unfortunately, after this, what came wasn't great for France. You got Napoleon, and you got the Napoleonic Wars, more death, more suffering. Am I saying that's what we're going to get? No, but it's not going to be a plain sailing. So when it's going to happen, I don't know. So what's this book got to do with the article I was talking about on Zero Hedge? Well, the article is as follows. It's entitled, Powell, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, warns of rising leverage and elevated valuations. Dudley Rosengren, QE will be back. So Dudley is the New York Fed president, and Rosengren is the Boston Fed president. And I told you earlier about this conference that the Boston Fed had in New York. It just goes to show that once you embark on this experiment of creating value out of nothing to keep the economy going and to inflate the business conditions, it's very difficult to get out. And that's what the French found out. But I wonder if these central bankers have ever read this book. It's more from, an Austrian school perspective. I would think that Ben Bernanke has probably not even heard of this book. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or follow me on steemit.com and on Twitter. And I'll talk to you later. Take care.